Welcome to Big Blend Radio's California Employment Law Podcast featuring San Diego attorney Ward Heinrichs. Welcome, everyone, on today's Big Blend Radio California Employment Law Podcast with Ward Heinrichs, who is an employment attorney based in San Diego. In fact, just go to bestemploymentattorneysandiego.com. See, I did good, Ward. We're going to be talking about what happens during disasters and emergencies, not only natural disasters, but also when it comes to crime. And in the wake of the fires in Los Angeles, and obviously our hearts, it's devastating what has happened out there. We thought we better touch base on employees' rights and what employers should know about employees' rights when it comes to disasters. Natural disasters. I mean, I can say this, Nancy and I, who, run Big Blend, we went through 4 hurricanes last year. We've been through wildfires. We've been through floods, tornadoes, not a tsunami, but that's actually a significant thing for California. Earthquakes, all of that, but crime also. So we said, hey, Ward, what happens in now? Could there be lawsuits out of this? And so here he is. Ward is here every 4th Wednesday, and welcome back, Ward. How are you doing?
You and I am doing well. All the wildfires are up north, so we really haven't had too much problem here in San Diego. Although in Mission Valley, which is not too far from where I live, they did have what ended up being a small fire. People were evacuating, but only just a few, and then it kind of died out and it got controlled. Good. So everyone in California is being affected to some degree with the Santa Ana winds and potential wildfire. But I'm okay.
Well, the wildfires
I'm doing well.
are hot. I'm glad you're fine, and friends, family, but LA is it's such a massive thing.
Oh,
You've been on shows with our friend Joey Stuckey, the musician, and he's on his way to NAMM right now, the National Association of Music Manufacturers. Their big thing, the Grammys, Johnny Schaefer, so many, I could I think 3/4 of the people we interview have some major connection to LA or live there. Friends, family, that's where Nancy and I come from. And so it's so huge, and how it affects the rest of the world. These kinds of disasters, it's not just the immediate, and it's the after effects of what happens. And so, when we look at what rights employees have, like if employees see a fire coming and, hey, do they have the right to just not even go to work, grab their kids from school and bail? I say they do. And apparently it looks like California law says that's okay too, right?
Protection for a job if a natural disaster or a criminal act creates an emergency situation. And the judge of that is a reasonable person under the circumstances if they think there is an emergency or a risk. So there's a lot of leeway to say, hey, it looks dangerous to me. I'm not coming into work. I'm leaving work, or I may go get my children from school.
Because it's so, when we went through the fires in San Diego, we were in the Cedar Fire, and I know I've talked about this on shows multiple times because we do so much on disaster. We went through 7 evacuations, full evacuations in a year and a half, which is a lot.
Wow, that is a lot.
And there were real arsonists trying to burn our town down. And so
some of that happens.
Everybody starts to get to, I did have PTSD at the end of it. A friend said, hey, Lisa, you need to go to sleep, man. And I'm like, because you're on fire watch when someone's trying to burn your town down. It's kind of freaky in a little mountain town. And I think we start to jump at any little thing. You know what I mean? And so that could be a hard thing. Someone just that's it, we need to go. But that's actually how we knew to get out of in the wake of the Cedar Fire coming in. That's how we knew to get out. And it was, nobody thought it was. And we're telling everyone, this is the big one. I feel like Sanford and Son, yes, there's the big one coming,
Are you going way back?
I'm sorry. I just watched reruns the other night and it's funny. But anyway, and it was the big one. And we could see it. And Nancy and I know nature and the environment. And we're like, dude, this is real. And people thought we were nuts, and we went and got them places to stay. And then by the time they got there, we had to evacuate again. And then again, And again, so it was so crazy. Um, so you could think you're in danger, but then find out you're not.
Be an issue. Again, it's the reasonable person standard. If you think there's a danger, so again, there's leeway there. What would a reasonable person think under those circumstances? So certainly, if you get terminated and you go, wait a second, I was acting reasonably, you could certainly file a lawsuit to test whether you were or not. And if the court agrees with you or a jury agrees with you, then you're good and you're going to get back pay and whatever else. If a court doesn't agree that you're reasonable, because sometimes I suppose someone could say, oh no, there's a fire, 50 miles away and go, I feel like this is dangerous. Well, maybe that's not reasonable. And then you wouldn't get the protection, but you get to test whether you were reasonable or not, at least.
Okay. And I think most employers know that if your employee is going to be on your nerves end all day, don't go to work. Like, honestly.
Well,
Um,
and I think most employers are going to be try to be extra safe, and if they make an error, it's on the side of safety. So I think most employers are going to go, hey, I think that there's a risk here, and I just don't want any of my people to face it. I think that's more common than the opposite, where they go, I don't care, or, the risk isn't that bad, so you guys got to stay and you can't use your phones. And that's another thing that's protected under these situations, use of phones. Then I think that happens less often than the more cautious approach.
I went through a hurricane in Florida when we lived in Florida and worked in the music organ store, and a hurricane was coming. And so the store is in a mall, and it was like, you need to evacuate. The mall's evacuating. Everybody go. This hurricane's coming. And this is my first hurricane. And I'm like, oh, this is a trip. Like, I was so young and dumb, right? Really in my naivety, big time. And I didn't even know. I mean, we didn't have YouTube back then or anything. I had no clue. I was like, oh, a big wind. Well, no. And my boss, who's from Germany, he's like, oh, a hurricane is coming. And he goes, let's close up the organs and then you can go. So we spent time preparing the store for a storm to protect all the instruments. And back of my mind was going, should I be here doing this? Protecting an instrument versus my life? You know,
Limitations in the law. If you are in a medical situation where your job is to protect life, then you don't have the same protections to just say you're going to leave.
oh, but this is
Yeah.
musical, not medical, musical.
Well, okay, yeah. Well, in California, I don't think a musician and musical devices are going to have greater protection than people in hospitals. So you're right. I think the music side would fall. You're allowed to go if it's a reasonable risk of
So
danger.
I could have told my boss, like, no, you do it if you want to risk your life. I'm more important than
Yeah,
an
yeah,
organ.
but I there's probably that kind of interplay fairly commonly. I've got stuff that's valuable because it's valuable, and I just need a little help with it before you go. And then you got to decide, well, does that make sense? And it looks like you were okay. So in hindsight, it's easy to say, yeah,
Dude,
that makes sense.
I'm to
But
be honest, the two of us actually just said, "Oh, look, this is coming. This is interesting." I mean, the back of my mind's going, "Should I be here? Should I not?" And then I drove down the coastline to see what was happening on the coast before I
so you were just
went to.
crazy,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was dumb.
young and
And
dumb.
then
Yeah.
it was young and dumb, and I made sure I had wine
Well,
for
you got to have your
everything.
priorities, right?
But I know I had wine, and yeah, and everything was fine until the next day. The next day was not good. Um, so that's what you learn from hurricanes, is like going through it is sometimes the easiest part. It's the next day that is the worst. And
You
but
see the devastation by that time, you go, whoa.
yeah, and sometimes I think also when we look at disasters, communication can be, people think, oh, I remember going the wildfires in San Diego when we were in those. And this guy is like, oh, well, everyone can get maps on their phone. And I'm looking at them going, we didn't even have electricity or Wi Fi or cell service. What are you talking about? Like, and now we can have more, but in disasters, coverage goes out. cell
Oh, that
coverage, internet
certainly.
goes out. So we need to look at that between employees and employers, that an employee may just not be able to get to you and communicate.
Oh, absolutely. Well, again, I think that probably. All right. Are you talking about for notice reasons? Because on some of these,
Yeah, like it's like
you
hell,
give
there's a
notice.
wildfire in my backyard, but
Yeah.
it's burned
Okay.
down everything.
If the law, and there is one law in particular here with that, where the one that I cited about going to get your kids in an emergency situation, um, if the school says you got to go, then and you can't communicate that, it's okay that you didn't give note. There's a notice requirement in that law, but it would be okay if you can't give notice and still do what you need to do, and then when you can, give notice.
Mm.
It's late, so it's not notice anymore, but there's a provision in the law that allows for that depending on the circumstances.
Wow. Okay. So everyone, Ward as always has an article that you can check out. It's listed and linked from the episode notes. Also, just go to blendradioandtv.com and type in disasters Ward. It'll come up. Sorry, but it's true. But okay, so we got Labor Code 1139, and that's the one where employers can't go after the employees that are going through some kind of disaster, right? Whether it's a natural disaster or maybe their husband decided, hey, I'm going after you, or something like that.
Yeah, that's the recent law that was passed. I think it became effective January 1, 2023.
Hmm.
That directly addressed, excuse me, disasters and acts of crimes that go to the level of an emergency. And that one said, hey, look, if you as a reasonable person think that the situation is unsafe in those two situations, then you're allowed to go.
Hmm.
And it also said you're allowed to use your cell phone during these situations as well, and some others.
Okay, so yeah. Oh, that's another thing, huh? The cell phone. Yeah, you're allowed to, like, if you're at work and something's going on, you're allowed to pull out your phone and do what you need to do. Um, you know, right?
Well, all
That's
right.
in.
So these laws are kind of difficult, I guess, to interpret in some ways because I read a couple articles about this before I wrote it, and I think many people overstated what the law actually allows, and so I went back to the text of the law and really scrutinized it, and I think there's a couple important things. One is this only applies if there are natural forces that cause an emergency situation or criminal acts. So a shooting situation jumps to mind um, that allows you to not come to work or leave work. And then also, and the same thing with a cell phone. It only if it's a natural force or a criminal act can you actually use your cell phone. So there could be other situations where you go, this is kind of crazy. I need to do something where technically the law doesn't cover that. And the other thing that the law about the cell
Ooh.
phone thing that is covered is only when there's an evacuation order of home, work site, or your child's school, or again, whether there's a natural disaster at your work site, or including the criminal act, maybe
Mm.
a gun situation. So
Mm.
there are limitations in that law that I think some people gloss over and they think, oh, it's broader than it is. So I think it's good to know, and I think I wrote it in a way that really brought that out.
Yeah.
Um, but and I honestly I would have written it more simply if I could have and just painted with broad brush, but I really think that some of these are important. Now, practically, I think if there's a problem and it's really not a natural force or a criminal act. Let's say, for instance, you have some type of chemical and the chemical is in drums and it bursts and you've got all this nasty chemical going around. That's not a natural force, I don't think. And maybe you could argue it, and it's not a criminal act. It's some type of
Wow.
negligence, or yeah. So technically I don't think that kind of situation is covered. And well, here's a good one that just jumped in mind when I talked about dangerous chemicals. Was that train wreck? Remember that in Ohio, and all
Hmm.
these chemicals were going all over the place. Is that a natural force? I don't think so. So
Yeah.
and let's assume that Ohio law matched California law, if chemicals start pouring into your business area because of this train wreck, I don't think that's a natural force. So technically, I don't think it's covered. But here's why I'm saying all
Wow.
this. I think as a practical matter, the employer is going to say, "Hey, let's get the heck out of here."
Yeah, I
So
think because don't an employer, because other laws that you've brought up is that you have to have a safe place. So now if your business suddenly has all this chemical stuff coming in. Okay, like remember the big molasses, there was a flood of molasses in I think it was Massachusetts historically, right? This day where all the molasses just spilled and people died in a flood of molasses. This is
you don't
true.
remember that. Okay. Well,
No,
that's
no, no, we weren't alive then. But this is a
oh,
true
okay.
story. This is a true historic story.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, you have to watch Drunk History, then you'll get these weird
Oh,
stories
I'll
like we
put
do.
it on my to-do list.
Oh, oh, it's fantastic.
Okay.
Anyway, it's the best way to watch history and learn. I just wish they could do it for kids, but since people are drinking and drunk and reciting the history, it's not a good thing for kids to watch. But this molasses thing really happened, this flood, and this was way back in the 1800s, right? So like if it was now and there was a flood coming in, it's like, oh, should I ask permission to leave my space? Hell no, I'm getting out. I'm saving my life. I don't care about what my boss says, because the boss may be really dumb too on this situation. I'm getting out. I'll let people know. But I think honestly, when there are situations, people all do what needs to be done unless there is one idiot. And half of the time, these laws are made for that one idiot.
Really true. Because I think,
You know what I mean,
like you
right?
said, that in most situations, the employer is going to say, "Hey, this is just freaking dangerous. Let's get out of here." And I will say though that there is some protection maybe under OSHA, because there's a general principle that underlies OSHA, and that's you got to have a safe workplace. And so if it's not safe, there's the general understanding that you don't have to work. So that could come into play. And again, I don't think there's a specific regulation, at least that I know of. I'm not an OSHA expert, that says, hey, if molasses comes in, you can leave, something like that.
Just using that.
But
Yeah.
the general idea is, hey, if it's unsafe and you're in danger, you get to go. So OSHA really might kick in under those circumstances too.
And also the violence side. We've done that before. If there's, someone being like if you're working in a bar and somebody at the bar is being an idiot and maybe carrying a weapon, um, you know, you as the employer have something that you need to make sure that, I know places you go into that they won't let weapons, you get checked before you go in for weapons, things like that, depending on where you're going. You can tell where I go. No, but
Been frisked at the door of a private place ever.
really?
Well, you know what? Oh, I'm going to take that back. I was going to a concert, a rock concert when I
Yeah.
was like 18, and they patted you down to see if you're sneaking in uh, alcohol.
Oh,
So, but they probably were looking for weapons too. But I'm not so sure. It was really about alcohol because a bunch of
did
young
you get
kids are
busted?
going. No, I didn't. I did sneak something in though, and they didn't find it. But anyway,
Oh,
that was a different lifetime.
I
Um,
want to know about this now. But anyway, everybody stay tuned for episode number 2, cliffhanger. Ward and his 18-year-old sneak in with something in his pocket or his backpack, But no, but they do check that. Like if you go to a concert, if you go to an event, some places like um I've been
you're right.
checked
I went
in
to
even the
uh,
belly up I got checked in, like for
yeah, I
St.
went to a
John Mayo.
UCLA basketball game last week, and yeah, you got to empty your pockets. Now they don't frisk you, but you have to
Mhm.
empty your pockets. And if the emergency, the screening system goes on, lights up and makes a sound, then they say, "Hey, it looks like you've got this." And again, I've never been frisked under those circumstances. If I've made a mistake, I go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to take out my change." Then usually it's fine. But they do check you. You're right. At public events, they do check you.
Well, and we're at that place now with shootings and bombs and all kinds of stuff happening in nightclubs and concerts. We're in that place, and employers are now going, hey, we got to have security for the safety of our guests, our clients, and our staff, you know. And
Yeah.
in those kinds of events, it's like, what do you expect your staff who are not security staff? Security staff understand all that stuff better. They know they're in that industry. So that's a whole other conversation, right?
They're not allowed to just leave if, you know, if it's a security situation. The rules don't necessarily protect them, at least the
Wow.
Labor Code 1139.
Okay, but you also brought this up in your article about volunteer firefighters, volunteer
Yes.
police. Are they protected when it comes to like, hey, your neighborhood's on fire and you're supposed to be on duty? What happens?
Yeah. Well, under again the 1139 that allows you to use your cell phone and leave work if it's dangerous, firefighters aren't allowed. Now, volunteers maybe that's different, but if someone who's getting paid, they're paid to be in danger. Same with police. So they don't get the protection of 1139, or at least it's watered down, that's for sure.
Now, what if you're a volunteer and like LA, are volunteer firefighters allowed to tell their boss from their, main job, hey, I got to go fight this fire?
Yeah. There's a different law that says, hey, if you have volunteer firefighters, volunteer police officers, that do that type of work voluntarily, that they can say, hey, I'm leaving because there's an emergency and I'm supposed to help contain that emergency or fight that fire, whatever it is.
Is that the same with Army Reserves or no? Do you think? Or is
No,
it
no.
mostly?
This does not touch the Army.
Okay, don't touch military on this. Okay.
No, 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 no. That's that whole different situation. And if
That's
you sign
martial
up to
law.
be in
That's
the
different,
Army or
right?
the Marine Corps, like I'm former Marine,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, you go into harm's way. That's just part of it.
Boom.
And state law does not govern that. No way. That's all federal stuff.
Okay, so none of that. Okay, speaking of federal law, so we've had an administration change since your last time on the show talking about all these new California laws for 2025, some of them
Oh yeah.
state, some federal laws as well. So we have a new administration and changes. I mean, it's literally, we're recording this on the day it's airing. It's the 22nd of January, and things have already changed. The DEI is being closed and all kinds of stuff is happening, right? And so I especially want to say this for California with the wildfires have just happened. People may think, dude, now what? Are any of the laws that you just said, and even the laws that we're talking about in for 2025, I think people may be feeling like, hey, a click of a finger, and everything we've talked about is, out to lunch because a president can walk in and change the laws. How when it comes to employment law, is that true or not?
To federal employment law, I think the president has some leeway there. That's mostly a congressional thing. So maybe on the federal side, but we're talking about regulations and very fine stuff. Not such a big deal, probably. Under state law, no. The president can't sign an order and say, California can no longer protect their people from disasters. No way.
Okay.
No way.
So it's kind of like I look at it as when we were talking about pot before, like weed, cannabis, should I
Oh,
say. It's
interesting.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of interesting because California is like, hey, you can do this. Texas says no, even though Willie Nelson lives there. Even Willie can get arrested in Texas. But so it's like that. But the federal law could say, hey, everyone can smoke weed. It's all good, recreational, medicinal. It doesn't matter if the federal law says that. But if you're in a state that says no, like Texas, then when you're in Texas, behave
Yeah.
like Texas.
Yeah. If the federal law says it's okay and the state law says it's not, oh boy, because there is preemption. All right, so let me tell you this. In California, they say it's okay to grow marijuana, personal use. This federal law still hasn't changed, and marijuana is still illegal. Doesn't, you can't grow it. You can't
Thanks
even
for the
have it.
reminder, Warden, since I travel. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
So what happens there is it doesn't preempt the California law on that. And I'm not sure why, and we're getting in the weeds on this one, but it doesn't,
Literally.
or at least it hasn't been challenged. Maybe the federal authorities haven't challenged it, but
Mm.
the way it's done is, well, if it's California police going into your backyard and seeing that you grew some marijuana, there's nothing they can do, as long as it's less than 6 plants, la di da.
Oh, the
But
federal
if the
cops come
federal
in.
come in, and now of course they need a right to come in, so there's got to be probable cause, la di da.
Oh,
But if the feds come in, yeah, they could arrest you. But what's happened as a practical matter that really, the federal um, authorities aren't pushing that very hard. So you
yeah.
don't see these federal arrests for marijuana in
Yeah. I
California.
just,
In fact, I'm pretty
uh,
sure that the federal government doesn't do much about marijuana unless it's like a big amount. Little amounts, I just can't imagine that they're wasting their time
no,
with that.
they're into the trafficking. But I was using that as an example, but that's going into the weeds. I thought that was really good. I thought that was funny. Sorry, but when we look
Oh,
at
that was
federal
funny.
versus state, I think
Unintended, but funny.
it is funny. Um, it is interesting because I think we're going to see some shifts, and I think people are kind of polarized at some, points of what, and it's change. There's a big
Oh,
change
you mean
for
what
sure.
Trump can do with his pen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Well, just be blatant, shall you? Yes.
yeah. Well, all right. So Trump signed an order about eliminating or at least limiting DEI
We
policies.
closed the offices today. They're all on paid leave.
Okay, fair enough. But that's just federal employees. It's not, won't affect DEI on the state level. So California DEI still can be in place, and businesses can do what they want too. It's not that what Trump's signature on an order will not affect a business if they want to have DEI.
Oh, and we should tell everybody what is DEI for those who may not know,
Diversity, equity, and inclusion policies.
and which is important with California's laws.
Oh yeah, it's a big deal in California. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting as we move forward. I can hardly wait for next month because there's going to be something quirky to talk about. I know it's going to be
Yeah.
something different. There's going to be, right?
It'll be interesting to see how those things play out. I agree with you. And so let's just see what happens. I'm not going to I'm not going to panic one way or the other. I
No,
just got to
there's
see
no
what
point.
happens first and then address it.
Yeah. And if you want to panic, go smoke some weed. I'm just kidding.
In
Just kidding.
California, not Texas.
Yeah, don't do it in Texas. No, don't do it in Texas. But Ward,
Is it
always
really
fun having
illegal in
you.
Texas?
It's illegal in Texas from what I know. I
Okay.
think so.
I don't know. A
Well,
lot of
because a
states have made it
travel
illegal.
writer went to Oakland and did the cannabis trail, and then they do gummies and all this, and then she was like, "Do I get on the plane with this or not?" And I won't say what she did, but when she got home, she couldn't do what she did there. So I know that it's
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right.
yeah. But you guys have cannabis trails. It's part of
Doesn't shock
tourism
me.
now.
I haven't been
Cannabis
on
is part
one.
of tourism. Well, I know you go to San Francisco a lot, so you just take a
Well,
little
I
detour
used to when
east.
my daughter went to Berkeley, so I haven't gotten up there recently.
Oh, Berkeley's got to have its own weed trail. Come on now.
Well, the school is surprisingly conservative, but the town, Berkeley,
Mm,
i- is
mm,
is pretty
yeah,
liberal.
yeah, it's radical. It's got some crazy cool history though, man. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
if you, it's amazing. Like, I think we're living in this era of absolute change over and over the last 30 years. I mean, since we've been in this country, it's pretty interesting. Like like all the political changes, from the Clintons, we've had Bush, we've had, Obama, and we've had all of that, and Trump, and it's just a very interesting thing to watch how things have shifted and changed and be on the road for Nancy and I going, what if? And wondering if it can. And I think that's what's interesting about now is we're finding out, and I'm not getting political, I'm just going, there's loopholes in these laws. and legislation and what the Constitution has, and it's making people open their eyes to different ways of how things can work, right? In the way our system is set up, which for
Yeah,
as an attorney,
generally, I
you've got to
agree with
think kind of
that.
interesting. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
generally, I agree with that. And an example of that is something I already brought up while we were talking. I
Mm.
really think people are overly broad with the authority Labor Code 1139 has. I've heard them say, "Oh, you can just basically do anything you want." Well, and I'm overstating it, but that makes it easy. And no, there's really specific things that
Mhm.
are emergencies, and there's specific ways of dealing. Specific ways that employees can deal with those emergencies under the law. And again, when you get back to the practical, I think most businesses are going to say, "Hey, take care of yourself," even though this law may not cover this situation. The molasses. Um, so, yeah, often you don't really understand what you think you know what the law is, but until you actually read that law and maybe read a case about it, you don't get all the little subtleties of it.
And you never know that that day you chose to think you are covered, do something, you're wrong in what you did. You were wrong about the emergency, and maybe that was a really big deal you were supposed to close, and it really hurt the business that you work for. That could be a no-no. You know what I mean? That could be where it gets wonky.
Yeah, well, at least under 1139, it's the reasonable person standard. And so it's true that if someone says, I think there's a problem here, I'm leaving, and you and then the employer says, well, you're fired for being so crazy, and then the person who left, the employee, files a lawsuit. And if a judge or a jury says, well, you really weren't reasonable, the tsunami was happening in Japan, not here. So, something like that. And then, yeah, then now the employer is okay in firing.
Well, okay, check this out. So going back to the musical organ thing. Okay, so again, very young, naive time in my life. I think I was maybe 20, and I had sold a musical organ to someone in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was living in, we were in Pensacola. I just moved to Pensacola, and I didn't know about tornadoes, and tornadoes were happening. There were these tornado warnings up and down between there and then, and I was supposed to go to her house and help her with the new organ and get her set up and give her a lesson and everything as what happened at the point of sale. Well, this day, they're like, you know, how the news is, you're all going to die if you step foot out of your house and all this. And I'm going, what the heck, man? I don't know what this is about. And I had a new car that I just purchased and another sales rep in the car with me. And I'm like, we need to get there and back fast. I do not want to be caught in these tornadoes. Well, this is how Lisa gets her first speeding ticket. And I swear to God, I've been on this part of the highway between Pensacola and Montgomery a number of times over the years, and they're just do not speed there. I'm telling you all, that is the biggest cop trap in the world. Like it is. There and on our way, I saw this cop pull over three trucks, like boom, boom, boom. He managed, and then he went back and harvested his tickets. He pulled them all over and then stopped and harvested. This was insane. And I could see this, and I was going like, I thought I was, I was 19, 20, right? Like, I thought I was a badass. We're going to get there. We're going to turn around and come back. And we both said, we better remember this cop is out here. Well, we go, get back, and turned around, and I'm driving, and you know what happened to me. I got part of the harvest with two others too, because he still did the three. He did this three trifecta of I'm getting you. And he comes up to me and I said, but there's tornadoes. And he looks at me, just shakes his head because I'm thinking this tornado thing was a big deal. I've never heard of like being in a tornado situation. The way the news was, I'm like, holy heck, but I did not want to not do my job. So I got a ticket. And apparently, when I went back to the office, my boss pulled me over and he goes, Lisa, rather say I'm not going because I could have gone to jail for how fast I was going. He was like, I got in big doo doo and I had a big ticket. And That was my big ticket. I don't get caught now.
An example of maybe the reasonable person standard where maybe Lisa wasn't really reasonable about the level of the emergency.
110,
I think that's what you're getting at. Okay.
110 miles an hour
Oh,
or something, like
now
100 to
I
something.
have driven that fast out in the desert, but I
Dude,
don't push.
don't do it. This was when I think I was close to that. I think I'm exaggerating, but if I go back to that, and boy, did I have to, I got it wiped off my thing and everything. But no, I got, everybody nailed me. I got calls from people throughout the company. Of course, Nancy, you know, she was like, "Don't come to me for that speeding ticket money. You put yourself in there." So,
Yeah.
that was a
Good
learning
parenting.
thing. It was, yeah. Oh man, there was no going to Nancy for money. Mm-mm. You put yourself in that trouble, you pull yourself out of it,
I
And
like it.
yeah, if I was doing something like a big project or education, then she'll do it. She'll go, and then you have a payment system, and she's going to make interest. Period. Go, mom.
I'm
Go, mom.
impressed.
If she
Yeah.
is, she's
I'm
a
not going to
badass.
take a
But
loan from her though. That is for
no,
sure.
no, but listen, don't do 100 and something in the desert. Don't do wheelies in the parking lot in an ice storm. If there's other cars, don't listen to Ward and I on those things, but do listen to Ward about these employment laws, especially for employees on disasters. Be aware of them because you may not be covered like you think. So, and you never know. So thank you, Ward. We can't wait for next month. Everyone, Ward's episode is article is linked in the episode notes. And you can go to blendradioandtv.com for more, but also go to bestemploymentattorneysandiego.com and don't ask about what he did in the desert. Thanks, Ward.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's California Employment Law Podcast with San Diego attorney Ward Heinrichs. Keep up with Ward at bestemploymentattorneysandiego.com or follow him on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also subscribe to Big Blend Radio at bigblendradio.com.